Okay, fastidious. It sounds like, someone who just keeps a tidy desk, right? But let's pull back the layers on this word. There's actually surprisingly rich history and some really interesting nuances kind of hiding there.
Absolutely, yeah. And for you, the learner, this deep dive is really all about getting a proper handle on fastidious.
Mm.
We want to explore where it comes from, how its meaning has, shifted over time, and how you can really spot it in action.
Right.
Hopefully we'll uncover some aha moments without feeling like we're just reading a dictionary entry.
Exactly. Not a textbook deep dive.
Yeah.
And we've got a great mix of sources for this. Etymological breakdowns, tracing the word's family tree, plus the solid definitions from dictionaries, loads of examples of how it's used in real writing, and even some, interesting bits from online discussions to give us the full picture.
Sounds good.
So where do you think we should jump in? I'm thinking maybe start with how we actually use fastidious today.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. In current English, fastidious mainly describes someone who is extremely, maybe even excessively careful and detailed, in their work or just how they approach things generally. Think about like fastidious research. You picture someone really dotting their I's and crossing their T's, right?
Absolutely.
Or scenes described with fastidious detail where every little element is precisely rendered.
Right, that real focus on the small stuff. But it's not just about tasks, is it? It can also sort of paint a picture of someone's personality maybe being very sensitive or having really high standards.
Exactly.
Sometimes standards that seem a bit unpredictable.
Precisely. You might hear someone described as a fastidious dresser, someone who pays a lot of attention to how they look.
Okay.
Or a fastidious eater, someone with very particular tastes. Picky, maybe. It can even describe having fastidious taste in something like art or music, where only the absolute best will do. And sometimes it does imply that degree of pickiness, like critics so fastidious they talk only to a small circle because their standards are just so high.
And then there's the connection I think everyone probably thinks of first. Cleanliness.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Fastidious is very often used to describe someone who is really concerned with being clean and tidy, a fastidious housekeeper, for example.
Right.
You see it in phrases like, even the most fastidious of households, when talking about, say, preventing mildew, or fastidious habits like quarantining packages, something we've all become a bit more familiar with lately.
Yeah, true. It's interesting how many different aspects of life that one word can touch on. Even a process can be fastidious, can't it? I saw an example of a short but fastidious hike, which I took to mean a hike done with, like a lot of care and attention to each step.
Exactly. Or a long fastidious process, suggesting it requires a huge amount of detailed work and precision. You could even talk about fastidious reverence in a performance, implying a very careful, very respectful way of doing it.
Now, it feels like sometimes when we say someone is fastidious, it can have a slightly negative feel. Like they're too focused on details, or maybe even a bit obsessive.
That's a very good point. Yeah, you definitely see that. You see it in that example of a fastidious man. In the context of really elaborate grooming, it suggests maybe an excessive level of concern with appearance, or the fastidious hiding of seeds, which almost sounds, compulsive.
Yeah.
And then you get the direct contrast, like someone not being fastidious in a sense of Mount Everest, implying a less cautious or perhaps more daring approach.
And some of the examples really paint a picture, don't they? Like a fastidious rendering of the dome of the rock. You could just imagine the intricate detail involved.
Oh, totally.
Or plastic bags tied with fastidious knots, which suggests a level of order that seems almost deliberate, obsessive maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And it's become a bit of a go-to trait for certain types of characters in fiction, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, the fastidious Hercule Poirot immediately comes to mind. His little mustache, everything just so.
Ah, Poirot. Of course.
Or the idea of a fastidious, precociously mature comedic foil. The character whose intense neatness clashes humorously with the chaos around them.
Okay, so I think we've got a pretty good handle now on what fastidious means today. But this is the deep dive, so we have to dig deeper. And that takes us to what one of our sources called the words disgusting past.
Yes, let's take that trip back in time. And the first thing to clarify, really, is that fastidious has absolutely nothing to do with being fast.
Right. Good point.
That's a completely separate word, totally different origins.
Good to get that out of the way. So where does fastidious actually come from then?
Okay, so it comes from the Latin word fastidiosus, and that had meanings like disdainful, squeamish, exacting.
Disdainful, squeamish.
And that evolved from an earlier Latin word, fastidium, which meant loathing, squeamishness, also dislike, aversion, even excessive nicety. So even way back in the Latin roots, you can see hints of the modern meaning, but also a much stronger sense of, well, negativity.
Loathing, disgust. Wow. That's a pretty strong starting point for a word that now often just means someone who's very detail-oriented.
It is quite a shift, isn't it? And the origin of fastidium itself isn't totally certain, but one theory is that it might have come from a combination of two other Latin words, fastu and padium.
Fastu and tedium.
Fastus meant things like contempt, arrogance, pride. It's even been suggested it could link back to a very old root word meaning something like projection or point. Perhaps the idea of a sharp or haughty kind of demeanor, looking down on things.
Okay, so a sense of arrogance, looking down on things.
Yeah.
That definitely connects with disdain.